I started Ghia thinking if there's really like 30 or 40% of adults that don't drink, like that alone supports having a product like this. We did a survey recently and we realized like 85% of the people that drink Ghia identify as drinkers and they're seeking moderation. They just didn't even have that space to do that before and say like, I'm going to take the night off.
Welcome back to the Fitt Insider podcast. I'm your host, Joe Veneri. Today I'm joined by Mélanie Masarin, founder and CEO of Ghia. In this episode, we discuss the rise of alcohol alternatives. Mélanie explains what sets Ghia's apéritif apart from other alcohol-free options. Plus, we talk about using intangibles like brand, community, and design to build customer loyalty. Let's get into it. The Fitt Insider podcast is brought to you by Jack Taylor, our exclusive PR partner. More than just PR, they're creative storytellers and brand builders who actually understand the health and wellness industry. To learn more, head to jacktaylorpr.com/fit. That's FITT. Hi, Mélanie. Welcome to Fitt Insider. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm very excited to chat today. I've, kind of as I mentioned, been following what you're working on from afar, and I've been excited to kind of dig in and learn more and now hear the story from you. But to kick things off, can you introduce yourself and tell us about Ghia?
For sure. I'm Mélanie. I'm the founder of Ghia. I live in LA, but I'm originally from France. And Ghia is a non-alcoholic aperitif. We launched in 2020. We're made using only real ingredients, extracts, juices, no flavors of any kind, no added sugar, no nasties. Ghia is fresh and a little bitter. It's kind of like your favorite Italian Amaro, but new age, non-alcoholic, and kind of like well made.
Yeah, absolutely. You have the pitch nailed in the short. What is it? What we're working on? And I think, for someone like myself, we can kind of break down, right? Like non-alcoholic aperitif, you say it way cooler than anybody else I've ever heard say it. And obviously important in terms of ingredients and quality and taste and all those things. But maybe for someone who's not familiar with even what it is or why somebody would drink it or what's appealing about it, where does that originate from? What's even the seed of the idea, and how did it come about?
For sure. An aperitif can take many forms, but aperitivo in general is that time that is like post-work, pre-dinner. I like to think of Ghia as a transition drink. It moves you from work into play kind of seamlessly. And aperitif comes from the Latin word to open. So it opens your appetite, it opens the conversation. It's like a warm-up, if you will. And as you know, I worked in hospitality for a few years, and we always said like the first drink that comes to you as you sit down for dinner is the most important one because it sets the tone for the evening. The minute you have a drink in your hand, like, you're kind of in the mood. And so Ghia is really centered around that occasion of the first drink, the 5 p.m. clocks, and it's time to relax.
Yeah, I think it's, the way that, at least in the States, at least how a lot of people interact with alcohol and going to college and binge drinking and very kind of low quality, right? Like what is the cheapest thing that you can find? That's oftentimes how people are introduced to it. And my family is Italian, so there's like a much different introduction to alcohol. And obviously it sounds like your family the same way, being from France, that this idea of it, yes, obviously it's a social lubricant and people have all different experiences and reasons to consume it, but it being kind of a central part of like winding down the end of the day or the meal experience or the kind of, as you say, to open, I think is how you described it, whatever's happening. As you started to think about, in many ways, reinventing, right? What was the alcoholic or, traditional drink? What was your thought process? Was it like, hey, I want this for myself. I don't drink, and this is an experience I want to still have because it's part of culture, family, the social experiences. Or was it, in some other cases where it's like, oh, identifying this maybe void in the market that I think maybe I could put my own spin on. What was that like as you think about, hey, I'm going to create this product and brand?
Yeah. Um, there's a few layers to your question, but I think the first one is like I never thought like, wow, this is a market opportunity and I'm going to become a CEO, you know?
Mm,
And also when I started, yeah, I could not get a single person to tell me, yes, this is a good idea. There's a lot of people that supported me because they said, we'll support anything you do, or, kind of kind messages of support like that. But it wasn't like, it was hard to find industry people that could support this idea because the people that didn't drink had such few options that
mm,
they weren't even used to asking for them. And so it started the social stigma kind of like melting. It started like way, way, way outside. Like there was so much work that needed to be done because just like giving people the permission to ask for these drinks almost. But this is I made this drink as a drink that I wanted to drink. So really from a culinary standpoint, like thinking about the tasting notes that I wanted and that I was craving when I was drinking. So it also helps to explain like that I'm not sober, but I stopped drinking kind of like accidentally when I was working for Glossier because my job was so crazy at the time that I just like didn't really have time to drink. And I realized that I felt so much better without it. And no one had ever told me that if I didn't drink at all, I would feel so much better. And it was like a big surprise. But because alcohol is like the only sort of like thing that's really bad for you that you're conditioned to think is like really good and you need it to be fun, you need it to be social, you need it um to meet people, you needed to be accepted by others. And so I was like, I don't drink. And I was constantly complaining that there was nothing for me to drink and that I would go to a restaurant and, people would say like, you're boring, or come on, just have one, or da da da. And I was like, damn, like I really want to like change the way people think about drinking. And like, can I have a drink that's non-alcoholic? And I was thinking about the things I was craving. And, a lot of time, like you start the evening with a glass of white and you think about what you're asking and you want something that's dry. And this dryness is something that I was missing so much from alcohol because it's something that just doesn't exist in mocktails. Mocktails are made with fresh juices. And so often they're very fruity, they're very sweet, and it's just not something that I want to have before dinner. So when I was drinking, I was a Campari soda person, but I'm also European. It's like I love that you can make it just Campari and then add sparkling water to it, and you can really decide like how concentrated you want it to be. It's so easy. You don't need a lot of ingredients. It's really taking the intimidation out of making a drink, and so that's something that we actually like. Really, when we created Ghia, we wanted to recreate. It's like one part something else. So you make Ghia like you would a Campari soda, even though they're obviously
mm.
very different. And then with the tasting notes, it's like I wanted it to be dry. I wanted it to be somewhat bitter, refreshingly, not like disgustingly, but like delicious and juicy. And most importantly, I wanted to create something that traveled through the palate. So that had different notes, kind of like with a beginning and an end, which is something that's very hard to do when you have mocktails because the sweet notes sort of overpowers everything. And so you'll have something delicious, but that's very one note as you swallow it usually. So Ghia, we want it to be complex. We want it to be bitter. We wanted it to be dry. And it's like overwhelmingly dry for some.
Yeah, I think when even hearing you talk about it, it's one, how knowledgeable you are about it and how clearly passionate you are for like creating a very high quality product, but also the complexity of what goes into it and how it moves through the palate and what the experience, even thinking about, we want to replicate in some ways like the ritual of like making a drink and all of those other elements. Was that obvious to you as you started to go through the process? Was that inherent to the process for you, that just like, this is what I want the brand and the experience and the taste and the all these things to be? So you set out to do that from the onset, or was it a journey as you kind of went through like, okay, how do I bring this to life?
Well, a little bit of both. Like, I think that coming out of Glossier and just also the fact that I was making this drink for me, like, I was acutely aware of like the fact that I wanted the brand to be like very customer centric. And then that I wanted this brand to make me feel like there was something really thoughtful about it, that it was so much more than the taste. There was something about like the social acceptance. Like there's something about alcohol that makes you feel accepted in a group of people that is lacking when you're not drinking. And that was the primary thing that I wanted to change. So really sweating like all over, and you can hear I'm not even like a first language English speaker, but it was like, how do we message this? Like, how do we address people? How do we speak to them in a way that's very personal? How do we never preach not drinking? How are we really thoughtful in all of the words that we use, such that we're never really talking and making people feel like they're excluded? Like the inclusivity is like our first brand value, and that's been our guiding light since the very beginning. But on the other hand, I had also never made a beverage before, and so I had to kind of figure out, it's not like me in my kitchen juicing lemons, right? Like I'm like a good cook, and that's kind of how things started. So I knew how I wanted to taste it, and I had no idea how to make it happen. So I just talked to everyone that I knew who's in the world of food. I have friends from college that started Magic Spoon cereal. They're super successful and so nice and so helpful. And they told me that there's this guy who makes candy, but he also loves mezcal, and you should speak to him because I feel like he can give you some pointers. And he ended up being our guy. I interviewed so many people, but that guy just seemed more creative and like to understand it more. So
Yeah, he got it. It worked out. It sounds like. When you at that time, it's not that long ago, right? What do you start in 2018, 2019, like on the idea, like working on it, or has it not even been that long?
yeah, we launched in June 2020, so we're about to turn 3 years old, but I was working on it for 2 years before that.
Right. So, out kind of in the wild for 3 years, but ruminating and working on the idea for five. And it feels like in many ways already like kind of the alcohol alternative, functional beverage, alcohol replacement, like all these different subcategories within non-alcoholic drinks are gaining a lot of traction very quickly. What has that been like from, initially you said people wouldn't even necessarily know that it was an option because there weren't options. They didn't even know they could ask for it, to now where it's like people are going out and looking for it and actively pursuing it. How has that kind of acceleration impacted you? And what has it felt like for somebody who's in it and like kind of going through it in real time?
I mean, honestly, it's so amazing, right? Because even my perspective on it has changed, where obviously like I have all my eggs in this basket. Like at some point in the journey, I was like, okay, I guess this is it. If I want this to happen, I have to like be a founder CEO, which is like not really something that appealed to me to begin with. And I had worked for CEOs for a long time, kind of like always loved supporting them and being really creative within this like very safe job of like working for someone that was the face of a brand. And I don't know, I was just like, I was working for Emily Weiss, had no desire to be her, but like was just like full of admiration for what she had built, and like had plenty on my plate. And she kind of like created this space for me to be really creative and create these stores and do all the things that I was doing at Glossier. But for Ghia, like I guess that was my job, and it's never really something that like I wanted. But when I started Ghia thinking, if there is really like 30 or 40% of adults that don't drink, like that alone supports having a product like this. And then we did a survey recently. So that's like fast forward 3 years. We did a survey recently, and we realized like 85% of the people that drink Ghia identify as drinkers, and they're seeking moderation. They just didn't even have that space to do that before and say, like, I'm going to take the night off. I'm not sober, but I can. And to me, that's so amazing, right? Like, I think that's like, maybe it's partially a reward for like never telling people they shouldn't drink and being associated with like just being a sober brand, that we have a little bit more mass appeal. But it's also just like showing you like how quickly like this caught on, because it makes people feel better, right? Like you have like the direct like validation of like waking up in the morning and like feeling super clear headed. And I have a friend who always jokes that he'll invest in Ghia if I put something addictive in it. And he was like, caffeine, nicotine, like figure it out. Like you can do it. And I'm just like, but you know what? Like actually we have the most natural like way of like making people realize that they feel good when they drink it. So I'm gonna stick to that.
I think there's actually, maybe something else even within that that kind of speaks to not only interest, but the particular approach that you've taken, which is like lots of other beverages in this space, they do have this functional component. They put XYZ, maybe it's caffeine, it's an energy drink, maybe it's for sleeping. And it's like not so much with Ghia. It's like the quality of the ingredients, the taste, like all those things. Have you found, like, in trying to initially, especially like the onset, like educate people, like what is this and why would I want it if it doesn't have alcohol in it? And to your point about being inclusive and, non-judgmental about, kind of pushing it on people, why they were choosing it, and then maybe like why they continue to choose it now as these kind of options grow.
Yeah, I mean, the brand, I think, like, was the first layer of that, right?
Mm,
Like, how do you create something that people gravitate toward and that isn't a lesser version of something that already exists? And that's also why we never wanted to be a gin alternative or even like an Amaro alternative. Like, we never say we're a non-alcoholic Aperol, like, or a non-alcoholic Campari, because that just feels like a not as good version of a Campari. And that's not
right.
what we are. Like, there's always very positive messaging around what we do. And our extracts are pure, and some of them we make in house, and we just really sweat the detail. And like, sorry, I don't mean to sound braggy. I'm just like really proud of like our ingredients. That's like the hardest thing. Like, one of the things that we talk about is it's what's inside that counts, because people love the bottle, people love the branding, people love the design. Like, that's things that are really fun for me to create. And we're so lucky that we've had amazing partners in creating the brand, but we wanted people to feel proud to have a can of Ghia in their hand. And that's something that's really hard to do when you have something that's known as an alternative. So really standing on our own. And that's, meant creating branding that felt very different. Maybe it doesn't feel very different today, but when we started in 2020, like, the Ghia font, the type, like the colors, the loud shapes, like that was really different. We were coming out of the world of like everything is designed for the internet and direct to consumer, and like everything is like pastel colored with like a sans serif font, things that, Glossier paved the way for. And for me, I wanted the label and I wanted everything to feel as analog as possible, because Ghia is about really enjoying being in the real world together. So for us, it's like to really encourage people to try it. And then hopefully they come back because they like it. Interestingly, I think a lot of people don't like Ghia the first time they try it, which
Mm.
I try to remind people that it takes 3 times to know if you like something or not. And like the first time you had red wine or a martini, you probably didn't like it as much either, but you like knew that, this was good. So like you probably wanted to give it another try. And that's the case with a lot of complex flavors. And that's the case with a lot of things that are not sugar. So bitter is definitely one of that. So we hear a lot like the first time I tried it, I didn't want it. And then I tried it again and then I started craving it. And that's like 1, 2, 3. So I hope that they come back because it makes them feel good and they know that it's well made and they trust the brand and, they just like how it tastes.
I think it's funny, right? Like, how many people do you know that liked coffee or beer or liquor, like like almost anything the first time that they tried it? So that I think that experience, of it growing on you is one that when people actually think about it, like it's pretty common. Um, you talked a little bit about the brand and maybe it's not different now and it was definitely different then, and you probably won't say it, you seem very humble, but it's like there have been others who have followed the kind of branding and style that you created. I think it's worth maybe delving into a little bit more, like what a lot of times people say brand and they say we wanted to do something different and we wanted to create this experience and we wanted to communicate all these things. And it seems to me that the people that know how to do those things, such as yourself, like can execute that and pull it off in a way where that comes through and it actually means the things that you're trying to convey. Whereas maybe someone like myself, who's not as creative on that side of things, like when people say that, it's like, yeah, sure, I know it when I see it, but I'm not quite sure how to execute something like that. Can you articulate like how you actually go about doing that in a way where it very clearly resonates with people, where the branding and the messaging comes through versus people? It's like talking about community. It's like, well, we want to build a community of like-minded people that do these things. Like, well, the people who know how to do that know how to do that, and everybody else like kind of strives to do that. Hey everyone, we'll get you back to the show in just a second. But first, I wanted to tell you about our exclusive PR partner, Jack Taylor. Honestly, this one's a no-brainer. We've known the Jack Taylor team for years. They work with some of the most innovative health and wellness companies. We're talking Whoop, Athletic Greens, Hyperice, and many more. Jack Taylor has an extensive industry network knows how to work with high growth companies and really invest in building long-term relationships. I know this firsthand because they're Fitt Insider's PR agency, so I can confidently recommend them, and I do all the time. From startups to more established brands, they go beyond pushing product to help companies truly thrive. To learn more, head to jacktaylorpr.com/fit. That's FITT. Now back to the show.
Yeah. Well, that's really nice of you to say, first of all. So thank you. I was never a trained designer and I did not, write the Ghia logo or whatnot. But I think that with everyone that we've worked with and kind of brought along on this journey, like one key question that we ask ourselves is like, how can we stand out and how can we be different? And that's already in polar opposite with like anyone that's like, I don't know, copying or like plagiarizing or doing all of that. And I, for us, there's also like a thirst for creativity. Like I want to launch a new product because I want to use new colors and I want to make new graphics. Like if you were like, oh, these are your two colors and you have to use them forever. I don't want to do that. I have too many ideas that are bubbling up at any given time. So it's like fine because I never want to do the same thing again. So anyone that is using our shapes, our colors or whatnot, like they're already a year behind because I'm working on like new stuff already. And it's flattering, right? Like so many times we work with photographers and they say like, wow, this picture I didn't know was yours. It's like on all of our mood boards. I'm like, don't tell me that. but it's okay. For us, the idea of community, it was very organic. If you ask me, how do you create community? I don't know. That's like a very high level question. But the way that we started Ghia is like, once I had a formula that was palatable, like, by the way, like these formulas, we taste a lot of horrible things. And then one day it's good, because it's so concentrated that you just have to find the balance. But for so many tastings before you taste like 50 really bad formulas before it's one. And I had friends that were really kind enough to give me feedback. So a few months before we launched, it was supposed to be a few weeks before we launched, right before we did our first production batch, we had our test batch and I invited people over and I made brunch for 100. They were like croissant and like, I don't know, like lots of eggs things and lots of cakes and whatnot, and did this beautiful table. And I was like, everyone comes over for brunch. It's going to be really nice. But you have to have a spritz and you have to take a Post-it and tell me everything you think. And I want to hear it. And so we had over 150 people that came that day to the brunch because it was people and their friends and they loved it. And so fast forward a few weeks later, we're supposed to launch. We took in all the feedback and COVID hit. So we were supposed to launch on April 1st, 2020 in restaurants only. Needless to say, we did not launch then. Like we pushed the launch, we like rallied like a few friends and family to put in a little bit more money so we could like build our website and build our packaging and whatnot. And like when we launched at the end of June, like all of these people that had come to the brunch like shared it on Instagram. People were like, wow, I saw so many posts about Ghia. And it's like, I don't have that many friends, but everyone felt like they had created this product with us and everyone saw our struggle and we had sort of like shared our journey. So I guess maybe in a way that was creating community. It was like making people feel heard the whole time, whether it's intentional or not, your customers or not. Like for us, it was building this group of people that was Team Ghia from the beginning. And we get asked a lot, like, because there's a lot of these brands now that have, celebrity endorsements and that creates so much brand awareness. And it's like so much, it's like so many eyeballs on you, whereas we've kind of had like friends and family and their friends and their friends and their friends, something I call word of mouth at scale, which is really hard to execute. And as we grow, it's like hard to continue to execute, but that's just been like our path.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible when it works, right? You know that you've landed on something that resonates with people when they're willing to do that, and now it's a matter of like keeping up, like you said, with continuing to do that at scale. I think one of the interesting things. So first, before I get too far ahead of myself, you were just talking about it there. You're planning to launch restaurants only directly at the start of COVID. It gets pushed back. It gets pushed back again. And you kind of admittedly like didn't necessarily want to be in like the kind of CEO role where all of this comes and falls to you and you're having to like navigate basically a crisis before you even start like with product out there. What's happening then in your mind, in your world to kind of keep pushing through versus saying like, you know what, maybe this isn't meant to be. Like we have this production run, we've gotten to this point, and like how long are we going to continue to wait and push before we actually get a product out there. So how did you navigate that? And I guess, how did you end up getting through that?
Yeah, I mean, we asked, all of our investors because we had raised our friends and family around a few months before what they thought that we should do. And like, it's like that realization when you realize like your parents don't know everything. And like we got like 50% of people were like, just push through, it's gonna be fine. And the other 50% were like, absolutely do not launch, And it's like, oh no, I have no idea what to do. And then we had the bottles and we didn't really know how long they lasted because we were in testing. So we had done some testing, but the first batch you kind of have to stress test the expiration. So we had like a 3 months expiration date on them, which was very conservative. They actually lasted a year, which just didn't know. And so we could push a little bit and we pushed a little bit, but we just had no idea how much longer we could keep pushing for. And at that time, it was literally just Henry, who's still our CEO today and who is a friend of a long time and, joined me on the Ghia adventure like super early on, and me. So we hadn't, I wasn't paying myself. We had very little overhead. We just had these bottles. And so we waited a little bit. And when it became very clear that restaurants were not opening up, like what was I going to do? Like take a job, Like I was only doing this. And it was like I had been thinking only about this for the past 2 years. Like I couldn't sleep, and I don't know, like it just felt like I just needed to push it into the world. And so we launched with a very, I would say, like humble post that was kind of like, oh, because we pushed the launch date and then all the Black Lives Matter protests kind of like came up. And so for a few weeks, obviously, like the news cycle was what it was. And like there was this like obviously much more important movement happening within the US. So it was like we had to push the launch again. And so at that point, I was like, we were all ready to go. We didn't know, but we also lost all of our press because no one obviously wanted to cover the launch of a non-alcoholic beverage. Like it's totally irrelevant at that point. And that's when it started to just not feel personal anymore. At first it was like COVID was like, are you serious? And COVID was also this weird, like, it felt like a different reality when it happened. It's like suddenly I remember going to a concert in LA on the 10th of March or 11th. It was Tame Impala and there was one person wearing a mask. And I was like, like thinking like, it's like someone is thinking that the apocalypse is coming. And 3 days later, I was wearing a mask and everyone else was wearing a mask for like a week later. And so it was quite destabilizing. But then when the Black Lives Matter thing happened, it was like, okay, well, I guess Henry and I now are just going to put the bottles in a friend's basement and we're going to go and protest as well because what else is there to do, And then when things quieted down a little bit, we launched with one Instagram post. And that's when our friends sort of like took over pushing this through for us. But the message was like, I totally realized that this is not relevant to anything in your life at all. But this is what I have been up to in the past few years. And it's out here, drinkghia.com, I hope you love it. That was kind of it. And people did.
Or maybe it was relevant, that
It was relevant. People had been drinking so much at the beginning of COVID and they were like, wait, that's an option. So
yeah.
I think willing to try something. Also, people were buying a lot of food and beverages online at the time. So it was not so far-fetched to be like, come to our website, buy a single bottle of something. I was packing the boxes myself, writing the notes for them. We did not have a 3PL because our 3PL told us, you can't come in, it's COVID. Right. And I said, what do you mean I'm going to launch a product and not show you how to build the box? So Henry and I got all the boxes, rented a friend's restaurant that was closed down, Westbourne in Manhattan, if you're familiar. And we stacked all of the bottles in there and all the boxes. And I was writing thank you messages to every single person that ordered Ghia. I did it for weeks. I did it for the first 1,200 orders that we got. And then I actually got carpal tunnel. So I had to stop. and then, I don't know, we launched and people came back, which was really fun.
Yeah, it's incredible to persevere and push through and have, kind of when all signs are saying that it's not going to work, have seen it come to life. I'm curious, initially you were saying that you were going to launch and it was going to be restaurant only. And then obviously as things kind of evolve, COVID, no restaurants, now you're shipping them. So, and it sounds like you had a 3PL lined up. So, direct to consumer was also in the plans. How has the distribution kind of evolved from being in restaurants, direct to consumer, being in retail? What does that look like? And what is the kind of aspiration on that front?
Yeah. We always say at Ghia, like, you have to be steadfast in your goal, but flexible in how you achieve it. And like nothing rings more true than our launch, than this line during our launch, because we really wanted to introduce people to Ghia through the culinary world. And the reason for that was, one, that's when it's the hardest to not be drinking, is when you're sitting down with friends and suddenly everyone's staring at you and you ask to order something and you don't know what to order. And, I think if you're telling people that you're an inclusive company, but they can only have your drink from the comfort of their home, then you're not really making this social moment inclusive to everyone. So that was one. Two, it's intimidating for a lot of people to open a full bottle and make a spritz. And so we wanted, them to get a perfect spritz. And it was a friend and family launch in 50 restaurants across the US. We also obviously couldn't get any distributor to take us on because all the restaurants were closed. Every distributor was wondering what was going on in their world. And that actually took a really long time, because even after the world reopened, people were like, I do wine, I do CPG, I do soda, I do water. And none of them even knew what to do with our category, or I do spirits. And now it's a little bit of a race for everyone to kind of take it on, because it's like a real thing that's probably here to stay. We are now in 1,400 accounts, 300 menus in America, and none of the chains, the large chains, have taken us on yet. So we're at Erewhon, Foxtrot, Bristol Farms, and Lazy Acres, but we're not at Whole Foods, we're not at Sprouts, we're not at any of the bigger ones yet. So we have barely scratched the surface. And a lot of that was like me and a team member sending DMs on Instagram to accounts to send them a sample and hope that they would take us on. A lot of restaurants were selling groceries, right? So that was sort of like a way to make that happen. Our split now is half e-commerce and half offline. And, e-commerce is also very driven by Amazon, which, if you're listening to this and you're like, Ghia, please put a positive review on Amazon, because there's a lot of people that do after they've had their first spritz and they think that it's way too bitter and then they come back later. So we have about like a quarter of our reviews are like 1 stars and the rest is
Wow.
5 stars. So that's like something that like is always super helpful.
Yeah, you have to almost put like a little note in there, like, don't leave a review until after you've tried it a couple times.
Try it 3 times and you can never remove reviews from Amazon, which is actually funny because I think the worst review we've ever had on our site is like a 4 star.
Wow.
So it's just a different consumer.
Yeah, do you think, does it feel like, launching in a very unpredictable time and kind of navigating that to now June 1st of 2023, does it feel like you have some sense of normalcy? You understand what the supply chain is, you understand what the distribution is, you understand who the like do you feel like you have a grasp on what that is now to move forward maybe in a different way, where previously it was like, who knows what's going on basically at every turn?
Finally, I think we do. We have a clear path. There's less like black swan events, that
Mm,
like are impacting our business. Like before, just even you can have like the most like logical, like strategic plan, and like there was just all of these externalities that like made it impossible to run your business. It's like people are not producing glass anymore. Like there's like congestions at the ports where any product's going to take 4 months to arrive, and there's no factories making glass bottles within the US. Or aluminum prices is at like an all-time high, and like Pepsi Cola is buying all the cans, so you can't get cans. Or, I don't know, there's like crazy California fires and you can't get the grape that you're getting. So it was only that for the first few years. And I don't want to jinx myself, but I do think that the business is getting a little bit easier because the category is sedimented a little bit. We have a core customer who loves the product and is very supportive. We definitely had like the SVB scared earlier this year, but I think that it's just part of being an entrepreneur, is like the roller coaster of emotions and like how it affects you. But yes, we finally are able to have a little bit more leverage when negotiating, cost with manufacturers. Whereas before it was so hard to make everything. It would be like, well, you can pay up or you cannot have a product.
yeah, and I guess the other piece of that is going from a time, as we kind of talked about earlier, of already the non-alcoholic alcohol alternative space kind of evolving very quickly, going through initially and raising what was a friends and family round, now as finding yourself in this kind of CEO seat and steering the business. Is it a different experience now having those conversations with investors, continuing to think about what financing looks like? Or is it still a challenge in getting pushback around what are consumer behaviors? Do people want this? What does it look like? Can you tell the difference at this point?
For sure. I mean, it's a very different investor that invests in like a friends and family round. It's literally your friends and family that just believe in you and know how hard you work and are kind of excited to be a part of the circle in a way, than to go to a fund and ask for, a Series B because you're going to launch in Whole Foods or something like that, which is like sort of where we're at now. But at the very beginning of those conversations, like I can tell, who gets it and who doesn't. And if there's someone that is already a Ghia drinker, then I know that like I have chances on my side, because there's a lot of like special things about Ghia, I like to think, that are very hard to explain. The way it tastes, first of all, like it's really hard if you haven't tried it to even imagine that a non-alcoholic drink like that isn't a soda will taste a certain way, or the way that it makes you feel if you're not drinking. And so I think you said the word intangibles and like brand, and those are all the things that I can try to justify, but you also can't put them in a deck really. And so if someone on the team like drinks it, usually I can tell.
Yeah, it's like putting my investor hat on. It's like one of those things that you end up kicking yourself for later, that you're just like, I didn't, like, you can look at all the numbers, you can look at all the, sales and distribution and order volume, but it's like the other things that are kind of more in your face that are just like, you can't quantify. So you're like, oh, I don't know what to do with this if you're not the person that like gets that, to your point. So I always do think it's interesting when you talk about like community driven or brand driven, product driven, like, yeah, it's something different that can be a challenge when you run it through a traditional model, right? Where there's no column for something like that. Um, when you think about continuing to grow, you mentioned like scratching the surface and having a sense of normalcy and understanding who the customer is. And I think at one point you even said like the specific to brand, but I'm sure it means across a number of domains too. Like so many ideas bubbling up, so many things that you want to do. What is kind of on the roadmap that you're excited about or looking forward to, or maybe even we should keep an eye out for, at least to the extent that you want to talk about and be public about?
For sure. I mean, there's so many things on the vision board that will never come to life. Like if it was up to me, it's like there'll be a Ghia hotel in Menorca, and it would be like a Tupperware section on our site, and we would have like, I don't know, like a million different products. But I try to filter myself, and so you can expect a spicy spritz coming this summer. So I'll tell you this
Yeah,
much.
well timed too for summer. That'll be awesome to see. Um, I think in wrapping up, for people who maybe have never tried it, are intrigued, want to give it, what did you say, the 3 tries before making up their mind, where would you point them? What's the best way to learn more or get in touch and check it out?
Drinkgia.com. You can use Melanie15 for 15% off your first order. Our product is cheapest on our site always. And then at Drinkgia on Instagram, we have a TikTok, but I don't have TikTok. So I want to say it's at Drinkgia too, but don't put me on that. And yeah, you can find us anywhere. You can also send me a message whenever.
Yeah, awesome. We'll get everything linked up. Hope people check it out. And it was great to chat a little bit more today. So thank you so much for making time.
Thank you for having me.
One more thing before you head out, help us spread the word. Take a minute to rate and review the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, or share this episode with a friend. And if you like conversations like this, you'll love the Fitt Insider newsletter. We send it every Tuesday. The link is in the description. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you back here next week.